All right, I'm back, guys. We left off. I was talking about triads. Now this time, I'm going to go into sociology as far as how it developed and a few of the people that were involved. I mean, I could talk about 10 to 15 people, but I'm not going to do that. And then go into the theories, and that'll be it for this chapter. But how did sociology develop? Well, it developed because of two key factors: industrialization and urbanization. Those two factors are really what made sociology. There were other things involved, not just that, but consumerism, the rise of capitalism, but that came from industrialization, urbanization. Those are the foundations of sociology, why it came about. If you think about those terms, industrialization, that's when we moved from agriculture and doing things like that to being able to mass produce things using machinery, becoming more industrialized. And so when that happened, not only were we able to mass produce things and do things faster and quicker, but also it came to the point where there were a lot more jobs, and so people moved where the jobs were, which were in cities, and these cities became more densely populated because of these jobs, because people moving there. So then, thus, we had urbanization. So you've got these two key factors that really changed society. It changed as far as the way people functioned and also where people lived. Instead of having people spread out in a lot of rural areas, then you had these clusters of cities where a lot of people lived. And there were some people that said, there was, well, especially one person in particular that said, okay, well, this is interesting, we should study this, or I want to study this. And his name was Auguste Comte, and he is considered the father of sociology. He actually coined this term sociology. There are other people like Herbert Spencer, Emil Durkheim, Karl Marx that are credited with helping begin sociology, but Comte is always the one that is the true founder of it. And he said, well, this is all interesting, this society is very different now, let's study this, let's look at how this can be. And whenever he did that, he said, not only do I want to study this, but I want to study it in a way that is appropriate, using the scientific method. Now, I'm not a big science person. There's a reason why I choose social science. Sociology is a science, but it's a social science. So that's why I like it. I'm not big on chemistry, biology, anything like that, but I acknowledge that the research method, the scientific method, is very, very important. It's the base of sociology, and sociology is the one that invented that. It wasn't one of these other sciences. It was sociology. Somebody that formed sociology, brought that to the forefront. So I think it's really interesting that something like sociology was the start of something like the scientific method, the start of research. So just a little tidbit for you. Just one of many things sociology has done that it doesn't get credit for. But so that was Comte. He wanted to study society, and he brought about the scientific method. And what we know now as far as research and studies and science is because of him. Another person I want to mention is Harriet Martineau, and this is a woman whose work was greatly ignored for many years. And if you think about excuse me guys, sorry about that. If you think about the time frame, late 1800s, early 1900s, and it was a time when women were very much undervalued. They're still very undervalued today, but it was much worse then. Women had these great ideas or did this great work, and then men would either completely ignore it, or they would take their ideas and use it as their own. So Harriet Martineau, she was somebody that was really big at that time. She took Comte's work. He was French, and she translated his work from French to English and made it available to so many more people. Basically, I guess in a way, you could say, began the mass production of his work. So she did that, and also she was somebody that was big for racial and gender inequality at that time. There are a lot of people who get credit for that, but she's often ignored. But she's somebody that was one of the very first people that fought for racial rights and also gender rights. So she's somebody that I always like to mention, because I think it's very important to look at that and to mention her. Another woman I want to mention was Jane Addams, and she's somebody who she founded Hull House, and this was based in Chicago, and this was 1889. She founded a place called Hull House. She was also somebody that was very big into, equality as far as race and ethnicities go, and as far as women's rights go. So she was somebody that was also. Sorry, guys. Apologize for this. But she was somebody that was big for that early on. And Hull House was a place for immigrants. She built it and founded it as a place for immigrants to be able to live, or them to basically have a safe haven, because as bad as it can be for immigrants these days, it was so much worse then. And she was one of the first people to really help out immigrants and the things that could benefit them. And she's also somebody that led a peace movement when World War One was happening. So that's often forgotten by people, and also she won a Nobel Peace Prize. So basically, this woman was a boss lady, I guess you could say. She was pretty awesome. So, real quick, I want to mention the three main theories of sociology. A theory is just a statement that either tries to explain something, describe something, or predict something. And sociology has three main ones. The first one is functionalism, or if you want to get technical, structural functionalism, but for short we call it functionalism. And that looks at society as a whole. It looks at the parts functioning together to form the whole and to keep society moving. It says that all of these parts must work together to make society function. If one part messes up, then it can throw everything out of whack. And they often use the comparison to a human body. If you think about one part of your body messing up, the rest of your body has to compensate. And, if you lose your eyesight, all of your other senses have to compensate a great deal. And you can think of much more simpler terms than that, but that's something that, obviously should bring the point home to you guys. But one criticism I have of conflict theory is that it basically, in a way, says that inequality, racism, sexism, these types of things are okay because society has to function. These parts have to work together, and some parts aren't equal, and life isn't going to be equal or fair for some people, which is true, but just because it's been that way doesn't mean it has to be that way. So I kind of that's one of my criticisms for it. And I was taught in conflict theory. And with conflict theory, they look at society as a battle, as a struggle over power and for resources. And if you look around the world for hundreds of years, you see that every single day. You see this struggle for power. You see men continue to own most of the power, and even with women making a lot of inroads that they have, there's still this huge gap there. And also, as far as race goes, whites still have the majority of the power, whereas blacks, Latinos, Asians, and natives, they don't really have any, which sucks because it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't never have been that way, and I hope that one day it'll change. But again, it looks at these inequalities, and it not only does it do that, but it also looks at ways to try to solve them. Say, okay, well, these things are going on, these things are happening, what can be done about it? And a lot of people criticize conflict theory because they say, well, I don't necessarily agree with it. It's too negative, blah, 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 blah. But here's the thing, guys. There's a lot of negativity out there in the world, and there's a lot of things that people don't like to acknowledge, people don't like to talk about. But conflict theory does that. It brings it out. So yeah, it does focus on negative, but there's so much negative that gets ignored. There's so many things that just get pushed to the background as if they're not important when they really are. All this inequality, the struggle over power, it's vitally important that people understand this, that it's happening. So I'm hoping that you guys, will not just have your eyes open, but also your ears open and really listen and actually maybe, go out and decide you want to do something about that. Because there's a lot of work to be done, and conflict theory does that. So not only does it bring the negative, but it also tries to look for solutions. Then you have symbolic interaction, and that looks at society from a very small level. I talked about as far as small groups, larger groups, and then whole countries or the entire world. Symbolic interaction looks at it from that small level, and it looks at as far as for each person, what life means to them, as far as like symbols, as far as their daily interactions and what they mean to each individual, and how that can impact other people, when they come into contact with them. So again, it looks at society from a very small level. And that's all I'm going to go through with chapter 1, or what I should say with the chapter on theory. And I will see you guys next time.